exciting things about the interview with Frances today is my students came up with the interview questions, and that's a first. So
Right.
one of the students wondered, what inspired you to be an author? Did all your different life experiences affect what you wrote or what you write?
What inspired me to write? I was doing many things. I grew up in a tiny little village in Quebec, a little tiny village. Went to one-room schools, didn't have enough books, had never met a writer, and yet I finished high school when I was 15. So I really had no urge to write because I didn't even know it was possible to write or to be a writer. How would I possibly have known that? I came from a fairly, poor family, lots of kids, little village. And it wasn't until I was probably maybe 19 or 20, I started writing a bit. I was a nursing student then. I went into nursing when I was 18 years old. I worked for a couple of years after high school because I finished high school at 15. And you couldn't go into nursing until you were 18. And in those days, yes, nursing education was free. So this was where a lot of young women went to be educated, to be trained, to have a profession. It was one of the professions open to women at that time. That's not that long ago, really. I mean, it was in the 60s, right? It may seem like a long time ago, but that's, that was one of the professions open to women. And I had already done accounting. I had worked as a cost accountant for a couple of years. I'd worked in a General Motors place. I traveled around. I started traveling when I was 15 years old because I just wanted to get out there and see the world. And once I started seeing a bit of the world, I just wanted to see more and more and more. So it really wasn't until I was probably in my last year of nursing training when I was a student that I started writing things down. And teachers began to say to me, oh, in fact, some of my teachers kept the things that I wrote. I wish I had those things now. We were asked to keep journals like in an outpatient department, for instance. Oh, I would love to see that, what I had written now. But one of my teachers, my nursing instructors, said, oh, I want to keep this because it's so good. And I would really like to have that back. So, after I finished nursing, I just kept on traveling. I worked as a nurse. I was an intensive care nurse. I went to, after a year of intensive care work, I wanted a year off. So I went to England with some of my friends, my nursing friends, and lived in London for a year, worked as a private secretary. And again, traveled all around Europe, went to Russia in the 1960s during the Cold War. And it wasn't really until I came back to Canada and probably when I was about maybe in my mid-20s, I started writing things down. And then when I met, I had done graduate work in nursing at this point at several universities, both at Duke in North Carolina and at McGill. And I was teaching nursing when I first married. And after that, I went out to Edmonton. We were moving out there. I had one child. And we moved to Edmonton, and I signed up at the University of Alberta to work on an arts degree. I had already taken courses at various places, towards my arts degree. And I wasn't really switching professions in my mind. I was just like continuing to learn, right? And to look around and do things and see. And so I went to university there, but I met W.O. Mitchell there. I heard on the way out, I found out there was a writing course being offered when I was going through the syllabus in the car. And I decided I would sign up. So that was a pretty big move for me. And W.O. Mitchell became my great teacher, my wonderful friend. We became very close friends for the rest of his life. And he's the person who believed in me. And he said, you're a writer. And, he helped me to believe that.
Right. Oh, that's beautiful. The next question is, you moved a lot, as you've shared. How has that influenced your ability to write or your life as a writer?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, totally has influenced me. Um, I think it gives me a wider look at things, a broader look. When I moved to a place, especially since I've become a writer, I mean, I really made a big commitment to writing probably when I was about 28, 29. That's when what we call making the commitment. That's when I did that. This was around the time I was meeting W.O. Mitchell. I made the commitment to be a writer, at least to try my best, right? I was trying to be a writer, but I did make the commitment. So when I moved around the world and lived in various countries and cities and provinces, I kept journals. So again, writing longhand, I have all of those journals. I think it's very important when you go to a new place to write things down, write down the sensuous details of things, because those details are very difficult to bring back and to remember. I mean, I have a very good memory. I've always had an excellent memory. So far, it hasn't failed me, and I should be touching wood somewhere. but keeping a journal means I can go back if I want to set a particular story, and I have done this in a particular country of Europe, for instance, where I've lived, or someplace. There it is. There I have it. The type of bread, the type of cloud, what grows on the trees, what people say. It's exposed me to languages. I always read the literature of a country I'm living in. So there's a language. I can use that language or bits of it, and I feel comfortable doing that. I feel comfortable talking about, a particular culture that I've immersed myself in. So it gives me language. It gives me different cultures. It gives me different ways of looking back at my own country from afar, as well as looking at, how someone like me, who would then be an outsider to a new situation, adjusts and what the issues and the problems are. For instance, in Germany, I lived near Heidelberg for 3 years and I learned the language, but the frustrations I encountered when I was trying to learn that language and manage a household with 2 children in a little German village, travel back and forth to Heidelberg, do my grocery shopping, carry on as a writer, do all of the things I had to do. I was able later to remember those things and apply those to, for instance, Grania in my novel Deafening, when she was trying to learn a language. I remembered how frustrating it was for me sometimes, to be misunderstood. And then, the person I'm talking to, I'd pull out my dictionary, but the person I talked to would start saying things louder, louder and louder and louder, as if it was a hearing problem, not a problem of language. Like there are just many, many details like that one picks up, and I feel comfortable. I feel comfortable writing about other places, writing about people in situ, with different languages, with different things going on, different observations, political observations, social observations. I love that. I've always loved that. But this worked against me when I first began to write, because I was writing stories from all over the world, wherever I lived. I was setting them in different places. And so I got a collection of stories together and I took it to maybe 4 or 5 different publishers before someone actually accepted it. And I was told, well, these are all over the place. I mean, why don't you stick to one place and then you'll have, a body of work set in one place, and we'll take it. But I couldn't do that. I mean, I'd lived everywhere. So I was much more interested in a broader, sort of more lateral, way of looking at things. And I mean, that by the way, that was a fairly insular attitude. And later that attitude changed in Canadian publishing. That was probably in the 70s. I'm talking about 70s and early 80s, even in the 80s, yeah, late 70s and in the 80s. It was very difficult for me to get a book of stories published. Yeah, and then Oberon suddenly accepted one of my collections, and they published three of my collections, yeah.
But how did you meet Phyllis?
Well, I met Phyllis, I think it was Sharon Butala, actually, who recommended my work to Phyllis. She and I had met. Sharon had read my stories, and I think she said to Phyllis, you might want to read Frances Itani's work. And Phyllis did read, I guess, my early collections with Oberon, and I was working on a new collection called Leaning Over Water, and Phyllis approached me and asked me if I'd like to have lunch with her. She was coming to Ottawa, and I agreed, and we met, and she told me she was interested in my work and asked me to show her my manuscript when I had it finished. So I did. And she published the first book I did with HarperCollins was probably my 6th or 7th book by that point, because I had published several books of poetry, a children's book, 3 collections of stories. And so my first book with HarperCollins, and then Phyllis and I went on to do, well, I think with HarperCollins, I've now done 8 or 9 books, 9, I think. But Phyllis was my first editor there, and she remained my editor the whole time she was at HarperCollins. So she edited my next 6 or 7 books. And she was marvelous, right? I mean, she was wonderful. She's a wonderful editor.
How did you feel being appointed to the Order of Canada?
Well, along with the honor, because it's a very great honor, I understood as soon as I went to the ceremony, and there's kind of a whole day of events, and then there's a big gala dinner in the evening. And Michael Jean was the Governor General at the time. I understood right from the beginning the sense of responsibility that goes with that. And I also understood that that there is a sense of leadership that goes with that Order of Canada. So I do feel a sense of responsibility for other people, for mentoring, for helping. I do what I can, to take my part and to do my part, in the country, not only with my art, but because of my medical background, my nursing background. I mean, I did nurse for 8 years, and I love that profession, by the way. I've done an enormous amount of work as a volunteer in medical situations, hospitals, and other situations. But I just feel it's part of my responsibility to give back, give to my community, be part of my community. So I do feel the leadership and the responsibility.
Wow, thank you. The students have written, you've published 18 books. How do you stay inspired and motivated to keep writing? Because it is such difficult work.
It's very difficult work. I certainly know that. Starting each book is like starting at the beginning again, all over, beginning as a writer all over. No matter how successful the last book might have been, it's just, you're back to the basics again. And for instance, at the moment during COVID, during lockdown, which I now consider after 9 months locked up, like I really feel locked up, locked in, locked up.
Right.
I am finding it quite difficult to be motivated because I just feel scattered. My attention feels scattered. And I don't know if that's happening to other writers or not. I find myself working on 3 or 4 different pieces, for instance, instead of one, just staying with it. So I'm working on a novel, which is half done. I'm working on stories. I have a collection of stories half done. I'm working on a children's book. I'm working on a memoir. And, I just feel scattered. My focus is all over the place. And I'm trying to rectify that. But that's one of the issues that I'm facing right now. in normal times, when, when we're not locked in and I don't have to stay inside my condo for 9 months, and my husband can't go to work every day. So that's, things have really changed here for us. Normal times, what keeps me motivated is always the end in sight. Even though the end might be 3 years away, 5 years away, normally I can write a book in 3 to 4 years, 2 to 3 years. With Deafening, it took 6 years because I do a lot of research as well. And it's those last 6 months of any book that I'm heading toward every time. I love that period of intensity. And it is so satisfying for me. And it gives me so much happiness, really. The intensity and the happiness. I just remind myself of that. There's always I don't know if this happens to you, Anne, but there's always a period for me in every book, especially in the novels, where I'm halfway and I just feel stuck, that I'm not moving forward or back. And how do I get past that midpoint? It's difficult, it's difficult to do that because you put in so much work, you can't turn back, you can't throw it away.
Right.
So you have to carry on, and you have to solve many problems in the book, whatever problems are arising in the book, in the work. And of course, every work has many issues to resolve and create. I mean, you're just, we're creating from nothing, right? So we're creating characters, story, situations, cultural background, social background. Like there's so much to create and to be accountable for and responsible for. And it's then when I get really stuck that I remind myself, but just think, think ahead. Think ahead and remember what it's like when you get to that 3/4 point or just beyond that, and how much you enjoy that final lap.
Right. My last question is, of everything you've written, what is your most memorable work for you?
Well, for me, the book I had the most fun with was Remembering the Bones, my novel. I had spent 6 years writing Deafening, doing a huge amount of research. And I thought, okay, for my next novel, I'm going to write something that requires no research at all, which of course is not true because I had to research all the detail that goes into, Remembering the Bones turned out to be about 4 generations of women. So I was writing about 100 years, 4 different women and 4 different periods. But it was still small details, that I had to look up and verify and authenticate. Very unlike what I had to do for Deafening, where I learned a language, where I went to other countries to explore and to investigate and interview and so on. So that, I think Remembering the Bones was the one. I laughed through it. I cried in it. I cry and laugh through other words too, but I remember finishing Bones. I think it was even on Christmas Day. I think it was Christmas morning when I finished it. And I just sat and cried at the table. I just was so happy with, finding the ending I wanted and getting it the way I wanted it. And Phyllis and I had discussed the ending, so many times, and back to the drawing board. And I just felt, okay, I've got it now. I've got it. I've done it. And I was very happy with that book. I'm very fond of all of, the works, but I never go back and look at them again. To me, I've got 2 shelves of books that I've written here, and I look at it and I think, I feel as if somebody else probably wrote those. I honestly look at that and think, well, maybe I was someone else when I wrote those. I don't know. I just, who did that? Because I'm always moving ahead. I'm always moving on to the next book.
Right.
So I think from readers' point of view, I often hear that Deafening is the most memorable book for readers. Others will tell me that Requiem is, because Requiem deals with the forced evacuation. It's not an evacuation, the forced removal of Japanese Canadians, 14,000, from the West Coast during World War II. And I'm very proud of that book. I'm very happy to have written it. It's another book I worked with Phyllis on. And I'm so glad I wrote it, you know. And it was a tough book to write because I'm married also to a Japanese Canadian. And it was just a tough book to write. And I never discussed it with him at all. He knew I was writing a book about that period, but had no idea what I was writing. And he didn't read it until it was in, between the covers. In fact, nobody reads my work until it's finished. Not even my editor or my agent. So like, I don't show my work along the way to anyone. So Jackie and Phyllis would be the first people to read my works when it finished, when I was finished with the novels. And now, of course, I'm working with Jennifer Lambert at HarperCollins, and she and Jackie see the, whatever I'm working on, they see it at the same time as well.
May I just say, I cried so much reading Requiem. And I was also just because, not to be critical of our school system, but I feel that the way Canadian history is taught, it's just glossed over, right? And that too many young people graduate not knowing about the Japanese internment, and just the politics of, and just the sense of loss. Like when I was reading, about the piano, and oh my gosh, I could, it haunted me. I had to stop reading. I had to put the book down. And because my parents were also born into a Japanese occupied Korea. So the story resonated with me on a different level, well,
I did not know about that episode of Canadian history. I didn't know about it until I met my husband. So I was in my 20s when I learned about it. Certainly nothing at school, but my children also did not learn about any, about this at school. They learned, of course, through the family. Of course, they're well aware of it. Right. But we learned about that together. Yeah, my children and I. And of course, I have all kinds of documentation and, went to the archives and, did 4 years of research and, yes, interviewed extensively for that book. And as I say, I'm very proud of the book. It was so hard to write. Sometimes it would be so difficult for me. As a writer, you can't judge your work as you go along, but you can't allow your characters to be judgmental either. So sometimes I'd be so angry about what happened or a particular detail that I'd interviewed someone and, some story that I was trying to replicate. I would just have to get up and go outside and walk and walk and walk. I'd walk for miles and come back just so that I would not be writing in anger.
Right.
Or,
oh my gosh.
No judge. I did not want to be judgmental. I mean, it's our job as writers just to present it. We present what happens. We present our story. We are storytellers. We present. That is our job. I learned that from Chekhov. Chekhov, never judge.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm going to go back and take notes. You're, I think, one of the most quotable authors. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Oh, thank you. This has been lovely. It was very nice to talk to you.